She doesn't belong here. The words, whispered with the sibilant hiss of a serpent, were not meant for him to hear. They were a venomous aside from the restaurant's hostess to a junior waiter, a judgment passed in the cathedral-like hush of L'Etoile. But Julian Kang heard everything. It was a skill honed in rooms where a misheard word could mean a betrayal, a loss, a death. He felt Lena stiffen beside him. He saw the flicker of hurt in her eyes before she masked it with a familiar, defiant tilt of her chin. She wore a simple black dress, one he knew she had spent a week's wages on, and she looked more radiant to him than any of the diamond-draped women in the room. But here, in this temple of old money and inherited arrogance, they saw only her inexpensive shoes and the hands that were not accustomed to manicures. They saw a world that was not theirs. A cold, quiet fury began to build in Julian's chest. It was a pressure he knew well, a prelude to the storm he so carefully controlled. For months, he had built a fragile world for himself and Lena, a world of quiet coffee shops and walks in the park, a world where he was just Julian and she was just Lena. He had brought her here tonight to show her a piece of his other life, hoping to bridge the chasm between them. Instead, this place had insulted her. It had judged the one pure thing in his life. He did not raise his voice. He did not cause a scene. He simply stood up. The effect was instantaneous. The soft clinking of silverware slowed. Conversations faltered. The very air in the opulent dining room seemed to thin and crackle. Every eye was drawn to their table, to the tall man in the flawlessly tailored suit who stood with an unnerving stillness. His face was a mask of cold politeness, but his eyes, dark and bottomless, held a power that was ancient and absolute. The room went silent. The hostess, a woman named Genevieve who prided herself on her icy composure, felt a prickle of genuine fear. She saw not just a wealthy patron, but something far more dangerous. She saw the man who owned the building they were in, the man whose family name was whispered in connection to every major shipping port on the coast. Julian's gaze found her. He did not speak. He simply looked at her, and in that look, she felt her entire career, her entire standing in this fragile social ecosystem, crumble to dust. He adjusted his cufflink, a small, deliberate movement. Then, his voice, low and clear, cutting through the silence like a shard of ice, he spoke to Lena, and only to Lena. "This place is not good enough for you," he said. "Let's go." He placed a hand on the small of her back, a gesture of infinite tenderness and terrifying possession, and guided her out of the restaurant. The silence held until the heavy oak doors swung shut behind them, leaving a room full of the city's most powerful people feeling as though they had just witnessed a quiet execution. Outside, the cool night air was a relief. Lena was trembling slightly. "You didn't have to do that," she murmured, though a part of her thrilled at the raw, protective force of it. "Yes," Julian said, his eyes still holding the fire of his anger. "I did." He looked at her, truly looked at her under the glow of the city lights, and the truth of his life, the one he had so desperately tried to hide from her, felt like a stone in his throat. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that the fragile world he had built was about to shatter. 3 months earlier, that world had not yet existed. There was only his. A world of shadows and obligations, sealed in blood and ink. Julian sat in a small, forgettable coffee shop on a street he rarely traveled, the steam from a plain black coffee fogging the air before him. He wore a gray hoodie, a deliberate piece of camouflage, an attempt to shed the skin of Julian Kang, head of the Cheongryong Syndicate, for just an hour. He was tired. The meeting he had just left involved a rival faction, broken promises, and the quiet, brutal reminder of who held the power on the docks. The violence was implied, a ghost in the room, but its stench clung to him. He needed this. The anonymity, the smell of burnt coffee and cheap pastries, the simple, uncomplicated rhythms of a world that did not know his name. And then he saw her. She was behind the counter, her hair tied back in a messy knot, a smudge of chocolate on her cheek. She was arguing with the espresso machine, her brows furrowed in concentration. She was not beautiful in the way the women in his world were beautiful, sculpted, polished, perfect. Her face was a landscape of fierce intelligence and weary resilience. Her sweater was old, the cuffs frayed, and when she finally tamed the machine and slid a latte across the counter to an elderly man, her smile was like a punch to the chest. It was genuine. It was light. It was everything his world was not. The room didn't just go silent. It ceased to exist. The clatter of cups, the murmur of conversations, the hiss of the steam wand, it all faded into a dull, distant roar. There was only her. The way a stray strand of hair fell across her forehead, the determined set of her jaw, the universe, for Julian Kang, had just contracted to a single point of focus. It was an experience so foreign, so absolute, it felt less like attraction and more like a fundamental shift in his own gravity. Min Jun, his ever-present second-in-command, sat 2 tables away, pretending to read a newspaper. He saw the look on his boss's face and felt a jolt of alarm. He had seen that look only a few times before, and it was always before Julian made a decision that would reshape their entire organization. It was a look of total, unshakable focus. But it had never, ever been directed at a barista in a rundown coffee shop. Lena Petrova felt the weight of his stare. It was a physical pressure against her skin. She was used to being watched. Men looked at her all the time, their gazes ranging from dismissive to predatory. This was different. She risked a glance. He was in the corner booth, nondescript in a hoodie, but there was nothing nondescript about him. The stillness of him was what caught her. He wasn't fidgeting, wasn't looking at his phone. He was just watching. His intensity was unnerving, a focused beam of energy that made the hairs on her arms stand up. She had a job to do. She had rent to pay, and her mother's medical bills were a mountain she chipped away at with every latte she sold. She didn't have time for intense, strange men in corner booths. She turned her back, wiping down the counter with more force than necessary. But she could still feel his eyes on her. He stayed for 2 hours. He didn't order anything else. He just sat, nursing his cold coffee, and watched. When her shift finally ended, she untied her apron with a sigh of relief, ready to escape the suffocating weight of his attention. As she pushed through the door into the drizzling afternoon, she found him standing there, waiting. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it. The moment it turned from weird to dangerous. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice sharper than she intended. She clutched her worn bag to her chest like a shield. He seemed to register her fear, and a flicker of something, regret, crossed his features. "I'm Julian," he said. His voice was deeper than she expected, a low rumble that vibrated through the damp air. "Okay, Julian," she said, taking a step back. "I have to go. I just wanted to know your name." The request was so simple, so direct, it threw her off. She eyed him suspiciously. There were no cheap lines, no sleazy compliments. Just a question. "Why?" "Because I plan on seeing you again," he stated, not as a threat, but as a fact, a simple declaration of intent. Lena scoffed, a bubble of nervous energy escaping her. "This is creepy. You know that, right? The whole 2-hour silent stare thing? It's textbook creepy." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It transformed his face, hinting at a warmth buried deep beneath the ice. "My apologies. I'm not good at this." "Good at what? Stalking?" "Meeting someone," he corrected softly. She saw the car then, a black sedan idling at the curb, sleek and impossibly expensive. A man in a suit sat behind the wheel. The hoodie was a lie. This man was not nondescript. He was something else entirely. Her internal alarms, honed by years of navigating the city's predatory landscape, screamed at her. "I'm not interested," she said firmly, turning to walk away. "Lena," he said. She froze. How did he know her name? She whipped around, her eyes wide with alarm. He gestured toward the counter inside. "Your name tag." Of course. She felt a flush of embarrassment which quickly curdled back into irritation. "Goodbye, Julian." She walked away, her steps quick and determined, not looking back, but she felt his gaze on her until she turned the corner, a brand seared between her shoulder blades. He didn't follow. That, more than anything, was what she remembered later that night, as she lay in her small apartment, listening to the sounds of the city. He didn't follow. He had waited, stated his intention, and then let her go. It wasn't the act of a common predator. It was the act of a patient hunter. He was there the next day, and the day after that. He always sat in the same booth, ordered the same black coffee, and watched her with the same unnerving intensity. He never approached her at work again. He just sat. The other baristas started noticing. "Your admirer is back," Chloe, her roommate and co-worker, whispered as she refilled the sugar dispensers. "Seriously, what is his deal? Is he a poet? A hitman? I'm getting both vibes." "He's a creep," Lena muttered, slamming an empty milk jug into the recycling bin. But her heart wasn't in it. The creepiness was slowly being eroded by a persistent, unwanted curiosity. Who was this man who could afford a car that cost more than her apartment building but chose to spend his afternoons in a place that smelled of stale muffins? Who was he that he could sit so perfectly still for hours, as if waiting were his natural state of being? From his corner, Julian watched her. He was learning her rhythms, the way she chewed on her lip when she was calculating a complicated order, the brief, unguarded moment of exhaustion that crossed her face during the afternoon lull, the way she treated Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who came in every day, with a kindness that was both gentle and fiercely protective. He was cataloging every detail, every nuance, building a portrait of her in his mind. Min Jun thought he was losing his mind. "Sir," he had said the night before, driving Julian home to his sterile, empty penthouse. "With respect, this is not wise. We know nothing about this woman. A background check—" "No!" Julian had cut him off, his voice final. "No background checks. I don't want to know who she is on paper. I want to learn who she is from her." It was a sentiment so alien to their world of surveillance and suspicion that Min Jun had simply fallen silent. His boss, the man who trusted no one, was choosing to be willingly blind. It was terrifying. After a week of this silent ritual, Julian changed his tactics. He knew the coffee shop was her fortress, so he found her elsewhere. She worked part-time at a local library branch 3 evenings a week, reshelving books to make ends meet. He was there one Tuesday, standing in the biography section, pretending to examine a book on industrial tycoons. Lena was pushing a squeaking cart of returns when she saw him. Her heart leaped into her throat. "Here? How?" "Now this is definitely stalking," she said, her voice a harsh whisper in the sacred quiet of the library. "I prefer persistent," he replied, placing the book back on the shelf with meticulous care. "I wanted to talk to you somewhere you couldn't use a counter as a barricade." She crossed her arms, the book cart her new barricade. "What do you want, Julian?" "To take you to dinner." "No." "Coffee?" "Not at your place of employment." "No." "A walk?" "No." She was resolute. This man, with his expensive car and his unsettling stillness, was a complication she could not afford. He represented a world of power and money that she fundamentally distrusted. It was a world that chewed up people like her and spit them out. He nodded, accepting her refusal without argument. "All right." He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out a slim, worn paperback. It was an obscure collection of Russian poetry, a first edition she had once mentioned wanting to a regular at the coffee shop, a conversation she had thought no one else heard. He held it out to her. "I thought you might like this." She stared at the book, then at him. It wasn't a flashy gift. It wasn't jewelry or flowers. It was something small, something personal, something that told her he wasn't just watching her. He was listening. It was the most dangerous gift he could have given her. "How did you—" "I pay attention," he said simply. She hesitated, her refusal warring with a flicker of undeniable warmth. Slowly, she reached out and took the book. Her fingers brushed against his, and a jolt, sharp and unexpected, shot up her arm. His skin was cool, his touch surprisingly gentle. "Thank you," she whispered, her defenses crumbling just a little. "You're welcome, Lena," he said, and for the first time he used her name with a familiarity that felt less like an invasion and more like a promise. "I'll ask you again tomorrow." And he did. He was waiting outside the library the next evening, and the next. He never pressured her, never crowded her. He just asked. And every time she said no, he would simply nod and say, "All right, tomorrow." It was Chloe who finally broke her resolve. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Lena, just go out with him once," she said, exasperated, as they shared a cheap pizza in their apartment. "One dinner. If he's a creep, you block his number. If he's a murderer, at least you'll die on a full stomach. But what if he's just a lonely, socially awkward rich guy who's genuinely smitten? Are you really going to let your pride get in the way of a potentially free meal at a place that has cloth napkins?" Her friend's logic was absurd, but it lodged in Lena's mind. What if? The next day, when Julian asked, "Dinner, Lena?" she took a deep breath. "Fine," she said. "One dinner." The smile that broke across his face was staggering. It was like watching a sunrise after a long night, a brilliant, breathtaking display that lit him up from the inside out. In that moment, he didn't look like a hunter or a hitman. He looked like a man who had just been handed the world. And Lena felt a terrifying, thrilling thought flicker through her mind. Maybe she was the one holding all the power. Their first date was not at a place with cloth napkins. To her surprise, he took her to a tiny, family-run Italian restaurant in a neighborhood she had never been to. The owner greeted Julian with a familiar, respectful nod that spoke of long acquaintance. They were given a quiet corner table. He was a different person away from the coffee shop. The intensity was still there, but it was softer, focused entirely on her. He asked her questions about her dreams of being a librarian, about her mother's health, about the poetry book he had given her. He listened to her answers as if they were state secrets, his gaze never wavering. She found herself opening up in a way she never had before. She told him about the crushing weight of the medical debt, the constant hustle of her life, the feeling of running in place. She spoke with her usual sarcastic humor, a defense mechanism she used to keep the world at arm's length. "So, what's your story, mysterious Julian?" she finally asked, swirling the pasta on her fork. "You've got mine. Now it's your turn. What's the family business?" She saw it then, the brief closing off, a shudder falling behind his eyes. "It's complicated," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I'm in imports and exports, logistics. My father started the company. I took over when he passed." It was a lie, or at least a carefully manicured version of the truth. She knew it instantly. It was too vague, too rehearsed. A part of her, the sensible, self-preservationist part, screamed at her to run, but another part, the part that was captivated by the sadness she saw in his eyes, wanted to stay. She wanted to know the truth behind the lie. "Logistics," she repeated, a hint of challenge in her tone. "Sounds thrilling." He met her gaze, and she saw a flicker of something raw and honest. "It's not," he said, and she believed him. He walked her home that night, the silence between them comfortable. Min-June followed at a discreet distance in the black sedan, a silent guardian shadow. When they reached the crumbling stoop of her apartment building, Lena turned to him. "I had a nice time," she said, and was surprised to find she meant it. "So did I," he replied. He stood a few feet away, making no move to touch her. There was a tension in the air, a question hanging between them. He wasn't going to kiss her. He was waiting for her permission. The courtesy, the unexpected deference to her choice, was more seductive than any move he could have made. She took a step closer. "You're a very strange man, Julian Kang." "I've been told," he said, his eyes fixed on her mouth. She rose on her toes and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his lips. It was meant to be a simple good night, a thank you. But the moment their lips touched, the world tilted on its axis. It was not a gentle spark. It was a lightning strike. a current of heat and want, and something that felt terrifyingly like recognition passed between them. She pulled back, her heart racing, her lips tingling. His eyes were dark, blazing with an emotion so intense it made her breathless. He had the look of a man who had been starving and had just been given his first taste of food. "Tomorrow," he said, his voice thick. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of fact. "Tomorrow," she agreed, her voice barely a whisper, before she turned and fled into the safety of her building. Tomorrow became the day after, and the week after that. They fell into a rhythm, simple dates, walks along the river, afternoons spent in dusty used bookstores. He never pushed for more than she was willing to give. He never took her to his world. He existed only in hers. He met Chloe, who grilled him with a series of questions so personal and direct that Julian was, for the first time, visibly flustered, much to Lena's amusement. He was gentle. He was kind. He made her feel seen, and more than that, he made her feel safe. The red flags were still there, the hushed phone calls he would take in Korean, the constant, watchful presence of Min-jun, the way he would sometimes go utterly still, his eyes distant, as if listening to a threat no one else could hear. But she chose to ignore them. She was falling in love with him, and the feeling was so overwhelming, so all-consuming, that it crowded out the fear. For Julian, these weeks were a lifeline. He was discovering a part of himself he never knew existed, a man who could laugh freely, a man who could find joy in the simple act of holding a woman's hand. He was compartmentalizing his life with brutal efficiency. During the day, he was the leader of the Cheongryong, making decisions that carried the weight of life and death. He met with his uncle, Dai-ho, a man who represented the old ways, the unbending, violent traditions of their organization. Dae-ho saw Lena as a weakness, a distraction. "This girl," Dae-ho had sneered during one of their meetings, "she will soften you. A leader cannot be soft." "She makes me stronger," Julian had replied, his voice dangerously quiet, ending the conversation. But he knew his uncle was watching, waiting for him to fail. The guilt of his deception was a constant bitter taste in his mouth. He loved Lena. He knew it with a certainty that was as absolute as his first sight of her, and because he loved her, he knew he had to tell her the truth. He couldn't keep her in this curated, sanitized version of his life forever. The two worlds would eventually collide. He had to be the one to orchestrate the impact, which was why he had brought her to L'Etoile. It was a first step, a foolish, arrogant step, he now realized. He had wanted to show her that she belonged anywhere she chose to be, that her worth was not defined by money or status. He had wanted to arm her with his power. Instead, he had exposed her to the very poison he was trying to protect her from. And so they stood on the pavement outside the restaurant, the aftermath of his silent, terrifying display of power hanging between them. "What was that, Julian?" Lena asked, her voice trembling but firm. "Who are you?" He looked at her, the woman who had remade his world, and knew the time for lies was over. "Come with me," he said. "I'll show you." He took her to his home. The word penthouse was inadequate. It was a glass palace in the sky, with panoramic views of the city that glittered below like a carpet of fallen stars. It was beautiful, minimalist, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the home of a man who had everything and nothing. Lena walked through the vast, silent rooms, her footsteps echoing on the marble floors. She ran a hand over a leather sofa that cost more than her mother's last surgery. This was his world, a world of staggering, lonely wealth. "My father built this empire," Julian began, his back to her as he stared out at the city. "He started on the docks, a young immigrant with nothing. He built it with his hands, with his mind, and with his blood. He created the Cheongryong Syndicate to protect our people, to give them a foothold in a country that didn't want them." He turned to face her, his expression grim. "But empires are not built on legitimate business alone. Not at first. We control shipping lanes, unions, construction. Most of it is legal now, corporate. But the roots..." The roots are in violence, in fear. That is the business I inherited, Lena. That is the truth of the money that paid for this apartment, for the car, for the suit I'm wearing. He let the words hang in the air, a confession that felt like a physical blow. You're a gangster, she whispered, the words sounding absurd and theatrical. I am the head of a criminal organization, he corrected, his voice devoid of emotion. It is my duty, my inheritance, my prison. Lena sank onto the arm of the sofa, her legs suddenly weak. Her mind reeled, trying to connect the two Julians. The gentle man who brought her poetry books and the cold, powerful figure who could silence a room with a look. The man whose hands she held and the man whose hands were stained with the legacy of violence. It was impossible. They couldn't be the same person. Have you killed people? The question escaped her lips before she could stop it, a desperate, horrified query. He met her gaze without flinching. His silence was her answer. It was not a yes, not a no, but an acknowledgement of the world he lived in, where such questions had complex, brutal answers. She felt a wave of nausea. All her instincts, the ones she had so foolishly ignored, had been right. She had fallen in love with a monster. A kind, gentle, sad monster, but a monster nonetheless. I understand if you hate me, he said, his voice quiet. But I had to tell you. I couldn't lie to you anymore. Not about this. Hate you? She said, a hysterical laugh bubbling in her throat. I don't hate you, Julian. I'm terrified. For you. Of this. She gestured around the vast, empty room. This isn't a life. It's a cage. I know, he said, and the simple admission was more devastating than any defense he could have mounted. He took a step toward her, his hands open at his sides. But with you, for the first time, I felt like I could be free of it. Tears streamed down her face. She saw the longing in his eyes, the desperate hope that she could somehow be his salvation. And she knew, with a certainty that broke her own heart, that she couldn't. Her entire life had been a struggle for normalcy, for safety, for a small patch of solid ground in a chaotic world. She could not step into his abyss, no matter how much she loved the man trapped within it. I can't, she sobbed, the words torn from her. I can't be a part of this. It's not who I am. Each word was a physical blow to Julian. He watched her, his face an impassive mask that betrayed none of the agony churning within him. He had known this was a possibility. He had prepared for it. But the reality of it, the sight of her pulling away from him in fear and revulsion, was a pain unlike any he had ever known. He had survived assassination attempts, betrayals, and wars for territory. He was not sure he would survive this. I see, he said, his voice flat. He had to let her go. To try and keep her would be to cage her, to pull her into the darkness and extinguish the very light that had drawn him to her. Loving her meant releasing her. It was the single most difficult act of his life. He called for Min Jun to take her home. The goodbye was a quiet, agonizing ritual in the marble foyer. She wouldn't look at him. She couldn't. If she saw the pain in his eyes, she knew her resolve would shatter. Lena, he said, his voice rough. She stopped, her hand on the door. Be safe. The simple words, a plea from a man who lived surrounded by danger, finally broke her. She fled without looking back, leaving him standing alone in the gilded cage he called home. The doors closed, and the silence that rushed in to fill the space was absolute. He was alone again, but it was a new kind of alone. Before Lena, it had been a simple absence of people. Now it was the active, painful absence of her. The weeks that followed were a gray, featureless misery for them both. Lena quit her job at the coffee shop. She couldn't bear to stand in the place where she had met him, couldn't risk seeing his car pull up outside. She picked up more hours at the library, losing herself in the quiet, orderly world of books. But there was no escape. Every romance novel felt like a mockery. Every tale of star-crossed lovers a personal torment. Chloe tried to help, bringing home ice cream and bad movies, but Lena's grief was a private, unbreachable fortress. The world felt dangerous in a new way. Before Julian, it had been a place of random, impersonal threats. Now she felt the specific chill of his absence. The safety she had felt with him, as paradoxical as it now seemed, had been real. Without him, she was just as vulnerable as before, but now she was keenly aware of what she had lost. For Julian, life reverted to its old patterns, but the color had been drained from it. He threw himself into the business with a ruthless efficiency that unnerved even his most seasoned captains. He was present in body, but his soul was elsewhere. Min-jun watched his friend, his boss, become a ghost, haunting his own life. The light Lena had ignited in him was gone, replaced by a cold, hard emptiness. His uncle, Daiho, saw this as an opportunity. He pushed for more aggressive tactics, for a return to the old ways of fear and open violence. "The woman made you weak," he said one evening, his voice laced with contempt. "Now you see the world as it is. Power is the only thing that matters." Julian looked at his uncle, at the man's cruel, narrow vision of the world, and for the first time, he saw not strength, but a pathetic, hollow ugliness. Lena had called his life a cage. She was right, but it was a cage of his own making, one he had refused to see the bars of until she came along. He had let her go to keep her safe from his world. But what if he could change the world itself? The thought was radical. It was impossible. The Cheongryong was what it was, an entity built on a foundation of shadow and blood. To change it would not be a renovation. It would be a demolition. It would mean war with men like his uncle, men who were steeped in tradition and violence. It could get him killed. He looked around his penthouse at the priceless art and the skyline view. None of it meant anything without her. His life, as it stood, was a gilded prison sentence. He was already dead inside. What did he have to lose? That night, Julian Kang made a decision. He would not just change his life for Lena. He would burn his world down and build a new one from the ashes. One that she could live in. One that he would be worthy of. His grand gesture was not a single act, but a slow, brutal war fought in boardrooms and back alleys. He started by calling a meeting of the syndicate's elders. He laid out a new vision, a 5-year plan to transition all of the Kang holdings to complete legitimacy. He spoke of selling off the illicit enterprises, the gambling, the racketeering, the gray market logistics, and reinvesting the capital into technology, real estate, and green energy. He spoke of creating a charitable foundation. He was met with stunned silence, then derision. Daeho laughed in his face. "You are a fool. A boy chasing a skirt. You would dishonor your father's memory for a common girl." "My father built this to give our people power," Julian countered, his voice ringing with an authority they had not heard before. In his time, this was the only way. But times have changed. True power now is not held in the shadows. It is held in the light. This is not about a woman. This is about our future, our survival. The syndicate fractured. The younger generation, tired of the violence and the constant threat of prison, saw wisdom in Julian's plan. The old guard, led by Daiho, saw it as a betrayal. A cold war began within the organization. There were threats, attempts on his life that Min-jun, fiercely loyal, managed to neutralize. Julian moved with the precision of a master strategist, leveraging financial assets, calling in old favors, and exposing the corruption of his uncle's faction. The final confrontation happened not with guns, but with documents. In a final meeting, Julian presented irrefutable proof of Daeho's embezzlement and his secret dealings with their rivals. He had been selling them out for years. The old guard was shamed into silence. Daeho was exiled, stripped of his power and wealth, a fate worse than death for a man like him. The war was won. The cost had been immense, but Julian was now in absolute control. The long, arduous process of transformation began. The Kang Corporation was born, a legitimate global powerhouse, rising from the ashes of the Cheongryong Syndicate. 6 months passed. 6 months of battle, of restructuring, of building something new. Julian worked tirelessly, driven by a singular purpose. He never tried to contact Lena. He knew he had no right to, not until the work was done, not until he had something clean to offer her. Lena was now working at a small independent bookstore. She had found a quiet peace there, surrounded by stories. She had started to heal. The sharp edges of her grief had softened into a dull, persistent ache. She told herself she had made the right choice. She had chosen safety. She had chosen herself. But some nights she would wake up from a dream of him, the memory of his touch so real it made her gasp, and she would wonder if she had chosen a life that was safe but empty. One crisp autumn afternoon, the bell above the bookstore door chimed. She looked up from the book she was shelving, and her heart stopped. It was Julian. He looked different. He was still impeccably dressed, still impossibly handsome, but the weary tension in his shoulders was gone. The haunted look in his eyes had been replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. He didn't look like a man in a cage anymore. He looked free. He walked toward her, his steps sure and steady. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask how she was. "The Kang Corporation is now the primary benefactor for the city's library foundation," he said, his voice calm and even. "We've also endowed a scholarship for aspiring librarians. Your old boss, Mr. Davies, suggested we name it the Petrova Grant." Lena stared at him, speechless. "I sold the penthouse," he continued. "I live in a brownstone downtown. I'm taking night classes in business ethics at the university. It's humbling." A small, self-deprecating smile touched his lips. "I wanted to build something I wasn't ashamed of. Something that added to the world instead of taking from it. You showed me that was possible. You showed me what a better man looked like, and I've spent every day since you left trying to become him." He took a small step back, giving her space. "I'm not asking you to come back to me. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you changed everything." He looked at her for a long moment, his eyes full of everything he wasn't saying. Then he turned to leave. Lena watched him go, her mind a whirlwind of shock and a soaring, terrifying hope. He had done it. The impossible. He hadn't just promised to change. He had remade his entire world. Not for her, but because of her. The distinction was critical. He wasn't offering her a place in his new life. He was simply showing her that it existed and leaving the choice entirely, completely, up to her. He was almost at the door. "Julian," she called out, her voice cracking. He stopped, his back still to her. She walked toward him, her footsteps echoing in the silent bookstore. She came to a stop just behind him. "You idiot," she whispered. "You absolute wonderful idiot." He turned slowly, his face a mask of cautious hope. "Lena?" She didn't give him a chance to say anything else. She threw her arms around his neck and pulled his face down to hers. The reunion kiss was not gentle or hesitant. It was a desperate, frantic collision of lips and teeth and breath. It was 6 months of pain and longing and misery poured into a single, searing moment. It was the taste of forgiveness and the promise of a new beginning. It was the sound of two broken halves of a soul finally clicking back into place. When they finally broke apart, breathless, they rested their foreheads together. Tears were streaming down her face, but she was smiling. "Is it legal?" she asked, a watery, sarcastic laugh escaping her. "Completely," he murmured against her lips, his own smile finally breaking free. "And it's all yours if you'll have it." "I don't want it," she said, pulling him closer. "I just want you." 1 year later, Lena stood on the terrace of a downtown brownstone, a glass of wine in her hand. The garden below was small but vibrant, a splash of life in the heart of the city. Behind her, through the open glass doors, she could hear the low murmur of conversation and laughter. They were hosting a dinner for the board of the Kang Foundation, the charitable organization she now ran. Julian came to stand beside her, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind and resting his chin on her shoulder. He no longer wore the armor of a custom suit, but a simple, soft sweater that smelled of home. "Happy?" he asked, his voice a low rumble against her ear. She leaned back against him, looking out at the city lights that had once seemed so daunting. Their path had not been easy. There were still shadows from his past, whispers and threats from those who resented the new way. But they faced them together. He had taught her what it meant to be strong, and she had taught him what it meant to be good. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered, turning in his arms to face him. "You're still a very strange man, Julian Kang." "And you," he said, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled, "are the best thing that ever happened to me." He leaned in and kissed her. A slow, gentle kiss, full of the quiet certainty of a love that had been tested by fire and had emerged, unbreakable, on the other side. In the quiet of their shared world, they had found their own kind of peace. Not a life without scars, but a life where those scars were a reminder not of the darkness they had escaped, but of the light they had fought so hard to find together. This story is a powerful reminder that love's true strength lies not in accepting a person as they are, but in inspiring them to become the best version of themselves. It demonstrates that redemption is not a gift to be given, but a difficult path to be chosen, often requiring the sacrifice of the very things we once believed defined us. True change is born from love, and true love is earned through change. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. The journey of Julian and Lena illustrates the profound impact of empathy and principle, showing how one person's integrity can motivate another to dismantle a world of darkness in pursuit of a shared future in the light. If this story moved you, please show your support by hitting the like button, subscribing to our channel for more content like this, and sharing it with someone who appreciates a story of redemption and powerful love. Now we want to hear from you. What did you think of the moment Lena chose to walk away from Julian in his penthouse? Was it an act of self-preservation or a lack of faith? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And finally, for our next story, we'd love your input. Should we explore A. The story of Min Jun, the loyal second-in-command, as he navigates his own unexpected romance while protecting his best friend's new life? B. A prequel story about Julian's uncle, Daeho, showing the brutal events that shaped him into the antagonist he became? Cast your vote in the comments, and we'll see you in the next story.